ANC turned 108 years old today. The anniversary comes as Africa's oldest liberation movement faces myriad of problems, with some even suggesting that it's imploding. But how bad is it? To discuss this and more, we're joined by Professor Stephen Friedman. A very good evening to you, Professor, and thank you so much for joining us. Is it fair comment to even frame that question like that, to say how bad is it?
Well, to be so, it isn't that bad. I mean, there's an irony about this, and the irony about this is that if you actually look at the string of by-elections that we had in 2019, in terms of retaining voter support since the last election, the ANC is doing very well. But there are long-term problems. There are very severe internal problems. I think unless it fixes those problems, the ANC is in decline. But that decline could take a very long time because voters don't seem to feel that there's any other party that they're prepared to switch their votes to. So the ANC could be imploding for decades.
And that's what I want you to say, that it's been said over several very strategic milestones. If we look at the past conferences, the policy conference, the elective congress, there's the NGC that's coming up. It's being said the ANC is imploding because of the fissures within the party, and yet some of the expectations by some of the pundits and even observers was that it won't stick, the top six, but we've seen them play a united front, especially in some very important issues. How should we interpret what we're seeing? Because there is putting on the veneer of unity, but where do we actually see that the party is not united? Is it in instances like in Tito Mbowene's economic plan that was put out there?
Well, it's not only that. I mean, you can even look at something seemingly trivial a couple of days ago, the absence of an ANC representative at the SABC Slovo Memorial. I mean, that's unprecedented. And the gossip is, which may or may not be true, that the invitation went to somebody who was in the other faction, so they didn't want the ANC to celebrate or to commemorate.
But I remember seeing something like that with regards to a COSATU Congress, where it was said that the invitation would not be extended to the then sitting head of the party, but rather to somebody who is seen as more empathetic with the left.
Well, exactly. So, those divisions are very real. But because the ANC is still the governing party with a very large majority, because voters don't seem to think that there's an alternative, a lot of people are just going to hang in there, and these disputes are going to continue, and the factionalism is going to continue. What the ANC really has to worry about in the medium term is that it has lost two constituencies, I believe, which are crucial to its existence. In the main, black middle-class voters have deserted the ANC. 20 years ago, I always say, if you met a black intellectual, the chances were that they would be sympathetic to the ANC or close to the ANC. Today, if you meet a black intellectual, the chances are they'll sneer at you if you even mention the ANC. So there's been a massive change there. And then they really don't have youth leadership coming up, and that's because of the way in which the youth league's been treated over the years. Now, you can carry on like this for a while, but if the middle class doesn't support you, you don't get the talents and the energy that you need to continue. And if the young people don't support you, obviously your time's numbered.
And as you've mentioned, the decimation of youth leadership, and we've seen there's been a lot of postponing and dragging its feet really on reaching some sort of conclusive decision on what to do with the youth movement and who should be at the helm. Julius Malema is somebody that you've mentioned in your past articles about how this has impacted on the party. As much as you say there's been no alternative in terms of who the governing party is, do you think a party like the EFF has managed to chip away and very effectively at the youth support of the ANC?
Well, there's no particular evidence that, we hear about the youth vote of the EFF. Nobody's really documented that. And quite frankly, a lot of the young people who say they support the EFF aren't registered voters. If you look at the EFF's trajectory since it was formed, and you look at the crisis the ANC has been in, particularly the 2016 local elections, which was the first time I talked about the black middle class leaving the ANC. The 2016 local elections, people who were not middle class started leaving the ANC, or at least not voting for it. Despite that, the EFF only picked up 2 or 3 percentage points. So that doesn't indicate to me that the EFF is seen by people as an alternative. Yes, the EFF will survive. Yes, the EFF will be a factor in our politics for time to come. But if you're talking about a party which is really going to challenge the ANC, really judging on its performance so far, the EFF is not that party.
And what would be challenging the ANC? The EFF has also claimed victory on the movement we've seen on some of the policy directive, the land issue, the constitutional amendment 18 that we're going to see that is up for public comment, saying that were it not for itself, then this would not be an issue within the ANC. And there are those who've said the fissures also primarily come from the lack of direction with decisiveness on so-called RET policies. Is that something that we're going to see, and is that going to play itself out on the delivery of the January 8th statement on Saturday?
Well, yes, we will see it, and it has to be a factor. And the reason it has to be a factor, whether the EFF existed or not, is that 25 years into democracy, we changed our political system. We didn't fundamentally change our economy. A lot of people are excluded from the economy. And as long as a lot of people are excluded from the economy, we will have these RET issues. Because, if you look, whether you look at land expropriation without compensation or national health insurance or whatever the case is, whatever Cyril Ramaphosa and his faction would like to do, the other faction simply has to say, are you saying that everybody in this country earns a decent living? Obviously not. Are you saying everybody in this country has land and access to the best services? Obviously not. As long as that's the case, then those RET issues are going to be around.
And I'd like to borrow from that term, sorry to interrupt you, Prof, on the issue of everybody in this country. Speaking to Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi earlier on about the Immigration Act, and I spoke to him about the impact that it'll have on business and labor, for instance, and he was saying, the problem is that our detractors are always going on about how we're not taking any measures to deal with our porous borders, but when we come up with policy directives such as this, but then there's criticism.
Well, I think he's making a mistake in the sense that the criticism doesn't come from the people who are hammering them on porous borders. And the criticism, quite frankly, comes from people like I and others like me who've researched immigration and who believe on the basis of hard evidence that a lot of what we're being told on immigrants is not true. But whether or not you believe, as many South Africans do, wrongly, the evidence suggests that immigrants take jobs or commit crimes more than South Africans, etc. And incidentally, the evidence suggests they don't. Dr. Motsoaledi has just published regulations not about ordinary immigrants, about refugees and asylum seekers. And for example, one of the clauses in that in those regulations say that refugees and asylum seekers cannot campaign on issues relevant to their home country without the permission of the minister. Now, if you remember the fight against apartheid, and you remember how much of it was conducted by ANC refugees and PAC refugees, etc., in exile, if other countries had adopted the regulations that we've now adopted, then the anti-apartheid campaign around the world would have been banned.
And Professor Freeman, his response to that, by the way, he said he calls that blackmail, and it's a pity we can't continue with the discussion because we've run out of time, but I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss it at the weekend and afterwards as we look at the ANC's message at its 108th anniversary. Thank you very much for your time and insights, Professor Stephen Freeman, political analyst, and we continue with international news.